Sometimes, those we trust most are the ones who mark us with scars that never really heal. And sometimes, what we learn about them is not in whispers or gradual dawns, but in a bludgeoning in a courtroom under fluorescent lights, with strangers in attendance, and flashes of cameras. Now, imagine this. A man who once built his entire identity on family, on loyalty, on being the pillar everyone could lean on. The man who told the world he had crafted something unbreakable, a household that could withstand anything. And yet, the story we're about to unfold shows just how fragile that facade truly was. What do you do when the trust foundation breaks? Not from the outside in, but from the inside out. What do you do when the person you trusted, the one you created memories with, isn't who you imagined him to be? For most of us, the mere thought of it stirs something deep. Because we all know what it feels like to trust someone, only to be disappointed. Perhaps not the same. Perhaps not on this scale. But betrayal? Betrayal has a way of resonating in every heart the same. The courthouse in Flagstaff was never intended to be built to hold so many secrets. But during those endless days, secret after secret poured out, until it seemed like the walls themselves were groaning to still be standing under the burden of it all. It wasn't just about money, though millions were at stake. It wasn't just about fraud, though the evidence piled higher than anyone could deny. At its core, it was about something far heavier, something we've all felt, even if quietly, in our own lives. It was about broken promises, about love twisted into leverage, about the agony of seeing that someone you surrendered your life to didn't see you as a partner, but as a tool. And perhaps that is why so many of us watched every second of this ordeal. Not only the intrigue of secret accounts and courtroom politics, it was something visceral, something that touched right into our living rooms and right into our own history. Because when Christine stood up, when the children testified, when the wives cried, they were not merely testifying against Cody Brown. In a very real way, they were testifying for all of us who have ever been disappointed by someone we never believed would make us fall. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Let me ask you something. What would you have done if you had found that the one person you trusted the most had taken your name, your security, even your children, and used them for themselves? Could you forgive them? Could you sit in the same room and listen as they spoke, knowing every sentence could be another strike with the blade? These are not simple questions. And perhaps that's why this story resonates so strongly. There is an image we have of fathers, of husbands, of leaders in a family, for people who grew up in another era, perhaps in small towns or tight-knit neighborhoods. The father was the one who was supposed to be the rock, the steady hand, the one who worked hard, protected the family, and perhaps didn't always talk much. But when he did, you listened. What if that image breaks? When the man who should have protected turns into the one who inflicts the worst cuts. Here it all played out in public. Every word that was captured, every tidbit scrutinized, every secret exposed. But in reality, what transpired within that courtroom was no different from what many of us have experienced behind closed doors. Disappointment, anger, fear, and underneath it all, grief. Grief for what could have been. And it was not only the betrayal of money, it was the betrayal of time. Missed birthdays, vacant seats at graduations, shattered holidays where laughter was supposed to be. That is an ache you do not read about in the headlines. That is an ache you sense in the bone marrow in your body, particularly if you have lived long enough to realize how valuable each moment spent together truly is. Still, amidst all the heaviness, something beautiful occurred. There were instances, not many, but several, that dared to whisper of grace. A daughter's shaking voice that spoke truth. A mother who stood firm, not for vengeance, but for responsibility. And at the very end, a woman opting to release, because what had occurred could never be erased, because it could never be small, but simply holding on to bitterness amplified its strength. Now, I don't want to spill everything yet. You'll learn it all in due time. The scam, the cons, the confessions, the verdict, and ultimately the sentence that shut the book on this chapter once and for all. But I want you to hold this idea with us as we embark on the tale. Justice isn't always punishment. It's sometimes about truth. And sometimes it's about finding peace amidst devastation. So get comfortable with me. Let's return with me to that courtroom, into those strained silences and biting moments of discovery. Let's witness the unraveling of a man who once proclaimed himself indestructible. And let's pose the toughest question of all. When betrayal runs this deep, is forgiveness even on the table? The courtroom was shrouded in a hush so thick it seemed like the air itself was waiting to catch its breath. Seated at the defense table was Cody Brown, a bead of perspiration gliding down his collar as Christine fixed him with her gaze from across the room. Her expression was not one of anger. It was the countenance of a woman who had been weighed down by betrayal for far too long. Clutched in her hand was a pile of papers that had the potential to deconstruct everything he had worked for. Secret accounts, suspicious deals, and decades of deception, evidence that could destroy him. And when the judge was about to call the first witness, nobody, not even Cody, had any idea what new betrayal was going to walk through that courtroom door. Before we get deeper into this explosive trial, throw me a question. You think who is keeping the biggest secret in this family debacle? Put your wild guesses in the comments. The day hadn't been like any ordinary court hearing. It had more resembled the oppressive calm before a storm erupts. Courtroom 14B in Flagstaff was full to bursting, every chair filled. Reporters pushed against each other for the most favorable position, cameras firing off strings of shots, and quiet murmurs rippled through the gallery. Individuals weren't here for a trial case. Individuals were here for a confrontation. The Browns hadn't been assembled as a family unit anymore. They were assembled as adversaries. For more than a decade, they had taken on the image of a family founded on faith, trust, and common values. But now, those selfsame values had been turned into exhibits, labeled and numbered. And Cody Brown, the man who had been heralded as the self-assured patriarch of contemporary plural marriage, now faced the possibility of losing it all. Christine, on the other hand, entered with a steady resolve that concealed the tempest within. She had not thought of this day with resentment, but with an intense desire for closure. These years of dishonesty, manipulation, and economic gaslighting had brought this day about. She straightened her blazer and looked in the direction of the defense table. Cody shunned her stare, feigning interest in a folder, though the tight clench of his jaw gave away his nervousness. By his side, Robin held onto her purse, her hands shaking just slightly. In the courtroom, Mary and Janelle sat uncomfortably alone, unsure even which side they belonged to anymore. Once sister wives, they were now nothing more than potential witnesses. The dream of unity had fractured into groups, irreparable. Case number 22, 1437. Brown versus Brown, said the clerk as the bailiff opened court. Next came in Judge Eleanor Marks, a quick-witted woman with a reputation for intelligence as well as zero tolerance for drama. This court is now in session, she announced, sitting down. We are here to hear charges of financial improprieties, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty against the parties before us. The air in the room was thick with tension. Cody's eyes finally came up, darting a brief glance at Christine. For an instant, memories played across his face. Laughter, promises, babies. But it was gone almost as soon as it began. Whatever love had been there burned away. All that was left was only war. The trial started. Daniel Keene, the district attorney, moved forward. A man with a reputation for taking down corporate titans with precision, Keene was a man not to be underestimated. Your Honor, members of the jury, he started, pacing carefully. This is not merely another family feud. This is a betrayal, a deception so well rehearsed that it stole from individuals their financial security and their self-respect. He pushed a button with a remote, and the courtroom's big screen filled with evidence. More than 8 years, Cody Brown drained almost $1.4 million from family accounts. Money intended to help his wives and kids went into shell accounts and side businesses that only he could access. The room burst into gasps. Christine's fists curled so tight her knuckles whitened. She took quick breaths, struggling to maintain control. Janelle shook her head. Not in surprise, she'd heard the numbers before. But in shock that it had happened. Keene went on, his voice steady but cutting. Transfer acts masquerading as business expenses, payments to non-existent companies, and even signatures forged on bank authorizations. This was not an error. It was intentional. And when this trial is over, you will know Cody Brown for what he really is. A man who betrayed his family for nothing but greed. And yet, he said, leaning forward with a deliberate pause, we have not yet disclosed who assisted him. That disclosure will rock this courtroom to its foundation. The tension thickened, all heads turned as though attempting to speculate who that co-conspirator could be. Then the defense began. Michael Raines, a seasoned attorney with a talent for spinning villains into sympathetic victims, stood quietly to his feet. With a practiced smile and an aura of unflappable composure, he was set to turn the tide. Michael Raines stood with the sort of calm assurance that only years of practice could provide. His voice was smooth, near soothing, as he spoke to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he started, what we have before us is not fraud. What we have before us is family business. Complicated, messy, and sometimes, yes, misunderstood. Mr. Brown wasn't concealing money. He was managing it, strategically, responsibly, with the goal of keeping everything afloat for everyone. He hesitated, his gaze resting for a moment on Christine, his voice dipping a little for emphasis. But when there's stress of the emotional kind, facts become distorted. Intentions are misinterpreted. Charges gather snow. That's what this case truly is. A snowball of misconceptions. Cody breathed slowly from the defense table. This was his version of events, to hold on to. Not as a con man, but as a patriarch misunderstood, trying his best for a complicated family. But he knew somewhere inside that this tale hung on flimsy, cracking ice. The first witness was summoned, Janelle Brown. She approached the stand with respectful stillness, although her shaking hands belied her nervousness as she laid them on the Bible and took the oath to tell the truth. Mrs. Brown, Prosecutor Keene started calmly, can you inform us about how the family handled money? Janelle nodded, her voice soft but clear. In the beginning, it was about trust. Cody told us all the income from the show, from book deals, from businesses, would go into one family account. We'd all decide together how to use it. She swallowed hard before continuing. But that's not what happened. Unprompted, money began to disappear. She confessed. Shaking now. Transfers we never agreed to. Charges none of us authorized. And whenever I questioned it, Cody would blow me off. He told me it was too complex, that I wouldn't get it, but it continued. Year after year. Keene walked over to the evidence table and picked up a document. Mrs. Brown, does this look like your signature on this $75,000 wire transfer? She read the page, frowning. No, that's not my signature. This transfer, Keene said, transferred money out of the family account to a business called Coyote Enterprises. A business owned and operated by Mr. Brown alone. Did you know that? Janelle's whisper came almost beneath her breath. No, none of us did. The defense sprang up, protesting, disputing lack of foundation. But Judge Marks quickly overruled them. The document was talking for itself. Cody had been draining money away without anyone's permission. And if that revelation shook the courtroom, the following witness's testimony would rock it. Keene subpoenaed forensic accountant Emily Rhodes to the witness stand. Serene, unflappable, and with months of financial sleuthing under her belt, she presented Cody's trail of money step by step, like breadcrumbs, leading directly to his doorstep. Our audit revealed several accounts opened in aliases linked to Mr. Brown, she testified. These accounts received regular deposits from the family trust, typically in amounts just below federal reporting limits. Were those accounts ever reported to the family? Keene wanted to know. No, Rhodes responded bluntly. Actually, many were concealed behind shell companies with no legitimate business. The courtroom burst into whispers. Even the jurors looked at each other with uneasiness. A misunderstanding was one thing. Opening up shell accounts geared towards evading discovery was quite another. On cross-examination, Raines attempted to spin the tale. Miss Rhodes, is it not true that numerous families utilize LLCs for tax reasons, for confidentiality, for security? Yes, she replied steadily. But most families do not employ them in order to conceal in excess of $1 million from one another. That response sliced like a knife. At the defense table, Cody shifted uncomfortably, the veneer of confidence beginning to crack. Robin leaned in, whispering frantically, but he pushed her back. Across the aisle, Christine sat stiffly, her face pale with victory. This was no longer about winning. It was about riding out the truth. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. The last witness of the evening was summoned. Robin Brown. The air in the courtroom was heavy with a second's notice. All heads watched her move deliberately to the stand, the quiet click of her heels sounding like a drumbeat. Robin had always been Cody's staunchest defender, the one wife who supported him no matter what storm was brewing. Now, sworn on the stand, she looked out at the jury. Mrs. Brown, Keene started softly, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Were you aware of the allegations we've heard today? Robin's lips shook. She glanced over at Cody for an instant before fixing her gaze back on the prosecutor. A hush filled the room. Then, in a shaky voice, she uttered the word no one was anticipating. Yes, she said. I was. A ripple of gasps spread across the courtroom, of a sound that conveyed disbelief and expectation in equal proportion. Even Judge Marks, who was famous for her stony calm, raised an eyebrow. And did Mr. Brown ever request that you keep these accounts from the other wives? Keene asked. Tears rose in Robin's eyes. Her voice shook. Yes. He said they wouldn't know, that it was best if they didn't know. The words strike like a sledgehammer. Cody pounded his fist on the defense table, his voice cracking. Robin, don't, Mr. Brown. Judge Marks snapped. Calm down. The courtroom came to a standstill as Robin's voice cracked. I wanted to believe him. I believed he was protecting us. But when I saw the figures, I knew it was not right. The air was charged. Journalists wrote frantically, attempting to record each sentence. Christine's heart raced. This was the door she had begged for. The fissure in Cody's shield, and it had been opened by the person he least expected to betray him. As the prosecution concluded its case for the day, the courtroom buzzed with energy. When Judge Marks dismissed, the corridor outside erupted in talk and breaking news. Robin turns on Cody. $1.40 million in secret accounts. Sister wives' empire on trial. Christine stood up, her legs shaking under her as she moved towards the door. She knew this was far from being over. The evidence was strong, yes, but Cody was not the sort of man to yield quietly. His revenge would come, and it would come hard. Hours later, Cody alone occupied the defense table. The gallery remained vacant, the reverberations of the day lingering in the air. He scowled at the witness stand, the pain of Robin's betrayal cutting deep. She had been his best friend, his staunch supporter, the one who was supposed to be there for him regardless. And now, sworn in, she had hammered the nail into his coffin. Nevertheless, Cody drew his fists into fists. This isn't over, because the reality was, the worst was yet to come. What was coming wasn't merely about secret bank accounts. It was about secrets so intimate, so poisonous, that money would be small time by comparison. As the lights went out in courtroom 14B, and the doors shut tight for the evening, one thing became certain. This trial was no longer about money. It was about betrayal, loyalty, and the lies that had kept a broken family intact. And somewhere deep in his belly, Cody knew, tomorrow would be devastating. The second day of trial broke beneath a gray slate sky, clouds churning like the tempest raging in the courthouse. If day one had been filled with spreadsheets and bank statements, day two held so much more volatile a promise. Human emotion, confessions, betrayals, scars no law could ever fully mend. Outside, the courthouse was ringed by a crowd that extended down the block. Journalists, aficionados of the family's one-time celebrity TV existence, and locals in search of excitement pushed for space. Cries went up as Cody arrived, accompanied by his lawyers. Where is the money, Cody? One man yelled. How many lies today? Another taunted. Cody had his head down, his jaw clenched, as if digging in against unseen chains. Within the courtroom, the tension was no quieter. Christine was already seated in her chair, her expression a mask of icy determination. She had not slept much, running over Robin's testimony in her mind. That single moment had knocked everyone off their footing. If even Robin was scared, it meant Cody's empire was more vulnerable than anyone had realized. The voice of the bailiff echoed through the room. calling the court to order. Judge Marks entered, holding herself with the same authoritative poise she had exhibited yesterday. "We now hear the case of Brown versus Brown," she declared. "Prosecution, your next witness, please." Daniel Keene stood up slowly, as a hunter would relish the moment before striking. His gaze crossed the room, then rested on the defense table. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Christine Brown to the stand." Whispers murmured in the gallery. Christine took a deep breath, calmed herself and stood up. She had anticipated this moment, but her heart still beat so fiercely. This was no typical testimony. This was her opportunity to finally say her truth. She approached the witness stand, raised her hand and promised to tell the truth. She then turned her head subtly. Cody glared at her with a look so cold, so bitter, that it might have cut glass. ChatGPT. The flame that had once connected Cody and Christine had long since died out, supplanted by something more sinister: resentment, even hatred. "Mrs. Brown," Keene started, walking slowly in front of the jury. "How many years were you and Mr. Brown married?" 26 years, Christine replied in a whisper. "And during those years, how were family finances explained to you?" Christine's jaw clenched. "We were told it was all shared. That we were one family, one team. All the money from the show, the businesses, the investments, was all for all of us." "And was that the truth?" Keene asked. Christine's voice trembled. "No, it was a lie, and I believed it far too long." Keene nodded almost imperceptibly, urging her on. "When did you first begin to suspect something was amiss?" Christine hesitated, her voice only just above a whisper. 6 years ago. I was trying to pay for Isabel's surgery. She required treatment, and when I tried to draw on the family account, I was informed there wasn't sufficient money. I panicked. I phoned Cody, pleaded with him to explain. He said everything was okay, that the money was only tied up. But I knew, deep down, that something wasn't right. So, I began investigating. The courtroom fell silent enough that you could have heard the whir of the fluorescent lights. Even the angry clicking of the reporter's keyboard ceased. Christine's voice shook, but with each sentence, her determination intensified. "I discovered records, transfers to accounts I'd never even known about, payments for properties I didn't even realize we had. When I confronted Cody, he said I was being dramatic, that I was paranoid." "Did you think him?" Keene asked softly. Christine took a trembling breath. "I wished I could, but I knew what was real. He had betrayed us." Keene's voice changed, weighted with gravity. "Mrs. Brown, did you find anything in addition to the financial improprieties?" Christine's breathing stopped in her throat. At last, she whispered, "Yes." "What?" Her gaze fell on Cody. It wasn't just being concealed, it was being spent. "On what?" Keene leaned forward. Christine's tone was as glassy as razor wire. "On a life with Robin and her children. Secret getaways, luxury cars, a house none of us knew she even knew about. He constructed a future with her on our funds, while instructing the rest of us to sacrifice." The gallery gasped. Even Janelle, who had suspected something for a long time, clapped her shaking hand over her mouth. Robin shifted uncomfortably, looking at the floor. Cody, on the other hand, seemed ready to burst. "This is not relevant," barked Cody's attorney, Rains. But Judge Marks cut him off with an abrupt sweep of the hand. "It bears directly on motive," she instructed firmly. Christine's voice broke, naked and unadorned. "I remained for years, believing we were doing this together, that we were all making sacrifices. But Cody was not sacrificing. Cody was taking from us, and the worst thing, he made us think we were the issue, that we were irresponsible, that we didn't get money. He gaslighted us into silence." Tears fell on her face. The jury leaned forward, faces etched with compassion, some with anger. Even those who had entered the trial, cynical of Christine's intentions, now envisioned her as anything other than a scorned ex-wife, but a woman betrayed on the most intimate level. Keene hesitated, his face serious. "Mrs. Brown, in your opinion, was there one moment that was the ultimate betrayal?" Christine nodded, her voice cracking. "Yes. When Truly was diagnosed with her kidney disease, we were scared to death. The treatments cost a lot of money, and insurance didn't pay for everything. I pleaded with Cody for assistance. He said there was nothing left, that we had overspent, that perhaps I should sell my own stuff to pay the bills. She shuddered on her shoulders as she went on. And then I discovered that 2 weeks before, he'd made a deposit of $80,000 into a private investment account in Robin's name, $80,000. While I debated whether to buy my daughter's medicine or turn on the lights, the courtroom exploded. Gasp, murmurs, even shouts from the gallery. For the first time, Judge Marks's stern face cracked, her eyebrows rising in sheer incredulity. Drones whirred overhead, and social media buzzed with speculation. Was Cody really going to take the stand? Would he break under pressure of his own decision-making? Would some new surprising testimony emerge before the day was out? Within courtroom 14B, the tension was so palpable it seemed as if everyone was holding their breath. Today would not be like the rest of them. Everyone sensed it. Cody came in late, following his attorneys and a tight cordon of bodyguards. The cocky, confident smile the world was used to seeing was gone. His face was tense, his movements awkward. He dodged cameras, elbowed aside reporters, and kept his eyes down as he entered the courthouse. Robin followed a few steps behind him. Oversized sunglasses hid her face, although they weren't very effective at concealing the puffiness that spoke volumes. She'd cried. Christine was already in her seat, her expression fixed like carved stone. She didn't so much as look at Cody. By now, it was no longer a matter of personal scores. It was a matter of survival. All rise, the bailiff commanded, as Judge Marks strode in, her bearing as dominating as it had been from day one. She nodded curtly toward the defense table. We will now hear defense testimony. Mr. Rains, you may produce your witness. Cody's lawyer, Rains, fastened his jacket with deliberate care. The defense calls Cody Brown. The gallery was filled with whispers. The reporters leaned forward, pens raised above their pads. Even the jurors sat up in their seats. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The man at the eye of the storm speaking out at last. Cody moved forward, waited with a man pulling chains. He moved slowly, his eyes elsewhere. He lifted his hand, swore to tell the truth, and seated himself in the witness chair. The air in the courtroom stilled, all breath suspended. Cody had held the narrative, through interviews, TV, family gatherings for years. But here, in this room, there was no cutting, no spin, only the truth. Mr. Brown, Rains started in a calming, near-fatherly voice. Can you explain to us in your own words how the family finances were managed? Cody swallowed hard, his first words not quite steady. We had multiple sources of income. The show, businesses, property. I was the one running everything because, frankly, it was too complicated for anyone else. I handled everything to ensure we were safe, that our future was secure. Rains nodded understandingly. Were you ever planning on defrauding or misleading your family? No, Cody declared firmly, his voice getting stronger. Never. Everything I did was for them, for us. The accounts they're speaking of weren't secretive. They were set up in that manner for taxes, for business purposes the others didn't grasp. And what about the accusation? Rains went on, that you used family money to support an alternate lifestyle with Robin. Cody's jaw clenched. That's a lie. Robin and I made some choices together. Yes, but they were part of a larger scheme. This wasn't about bias. It was about stability. The defense attorney smiled slightly. The jury appeared nervous but engaged, still considering his words. Mr. Brown, in your mind, why are you being charged with these things now? Cody let out a deep sigh, his shoulders sagging. Because when a family breaks up, folks seek someone to blame. They need a villain, and I've become the convenient one. I did everything to keep us together. But when others decided to leave, they had to justify. So now I'm the monster. It was a deliberately built-up image. Cody the victim, misunderstood, unjustly characterized as the villain. But before he got comfortable in that position, the real tempest kicked in. Prosecutor Daniel Keene stood to cross-examine, his gaze piercing, his tone incisive. Mr. Brown, you stated these statements weren't secret. Is that correct? Yes. Then explain to us, why didn't any of your wives have access to them? None of them? Cody shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Because finance is complicated. I didn't want to have them worrying about things they couldn't. Keene interrupted him. his voice cutting through the air. Mr. Brown, were you aware that more than $400,000 were put into an LLC under a disguised business name? Cody stuttered, his words stumbling. I don't recall the exact. And are you familiar? Keene pressed, moving forward, that those monies were used to buy property in your sole name. Property that none of your wives ever even knew you owned. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters wrote madly. Jurors shot nervous glances. And Cody's face burned deep red. The picture of a serene, unselfish provider was cracking, and everybody in the room was witnessing it. That property was an investment, Cody stammered weakly. Keene struck. One investment you lied about. One investment you hid from your family while promising them they were broke. He slapped a paper down on the evidence table with a crack that reverberated throughout the chamber. Exhibit G. The buy agreement, your signature alone, paid for in its entirety with money stolen from the family account. Cody's jaw dropped open, but his mouth was a silent gap. Silence in the courtroom was oppressive. And then there was the final punch, one that took away the very last bit of credibility Cody possessed. Mr. Brown, Keene continued pacing purposefully in front of the jury. Do you remember informing Christine they didn't have any money for Truly's treatment? Yes, Cody confessed, his voice drained of emotion. And do you remember also wiring $80,000 into a private account in the name of Robin 2 weeks prior? Cody's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. That was for whatever for Mr. Brown. Keene interrupted brusquely. For an emergency fund, for the good of the family, or for Robin's luxury SUV, bought 3 days later. The gallery gasped as one. Robin covered her face with her hands. Christine's eyes welled up with tears, but she never dropped her gaze. This was the man she trusted. The man who informed her that they could not purchase medicine for their daughter, while purchasing his favorite wife a new car. I didn't mean, Cody began, but Keene slammed over him. You didn't mean to, or you didn't think you'd get caught. The judge rapped her gavel, attempting to restore order, but the harm was done. The jury's faces set hard, some with anger, some with revulsion. Cody's defense was crumbling, minute by minute, on the foundation of his own deeds, and the prosecution had more. Keene's voice dropped, cold as death. Mr. Brown, do you deny trying to coerce your wives into signing contracts they didn't understand? What? No, never. Then tell me this. Keene held up a contract, a deal giving you complete control over all family finances. Christine signed it, but she affirmed in court she never signed that document. Can you tell me why? Cody stiffened. His lips opened, but no sound emerged. I don't know, he stammered. You don't know? Keene's voice sharpened like a blade. Handwriting experts determined the signature was forged, and the only person with access to this document before it went to the bank was you. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Christine pressed her hands to her face. Even Mary, stoic, reserved, looked visibly shaken. This is ridiculous, Cody growled, his voice cracking. I didn't forge it. Then how do you account for? Keene retorted. That your assistant emailed this document from your account shortly after the alleged signing. Sweat dripped down Cody's temple. His fists clenched on the witness stand so tightly his knuckles whitened. I don't know how to account for that. No? Keene replied with icy precision. I didn't think you could. He nodded, pleased. No further questions. The cross-examination concluded with Cody stumbling back to the defense table, his head in his hands, his fingers wrapped around his own skull. His empire, his control, his image so painstakingly honed, shattered in a matter of an hour. And just as Cody believed the nightmare could not get any worse, the prosecutor brought out a witness who was not there to discuss bank accounts or wire transfers. They were there to talk about something much darker. The bailiff called Dr. Elise Carter to testify, a psychologist composed and professional. She sat and pulled up her glasses, but her words hit like body blows. What I discovered, she said flatly, was a long-term coercive control pattern. Mr. Brown fostered an environment in which disagreeing meant betraying. Financial dependence wasn't merely a tool. Financial dependence was a weapon. Can you explain? Keene asked. Yes, a number of family members said that they were cautioned never to ask questions about money. If they really believed in him, they would not ask questions. That is typical coercive conditioning. It produces silence even when individuals know something is horribly awry. The jurors leaned in, transfixed. It was no longer about dollars and dimes. It was about power, manipulation, control. The courtroom was not merely seeing financial deceit, it was gazing into the physiology of abuse. This trial was not just about secret cash and secret accounts anymore. It had evolved into something much deeper, about control, power, and the deconstruction of a man's well-crafted persona. Christine brushed a tear from her cheek. Janelle remained still, her gaze far away, reliving years of dialogue now tainted with deception. Even Robin, who had held on so fiercely to Cody during the tempest, appeared to fold into herself, as if at last she was perceiving the fissures. Then came the unanticipated moment. The day's final witness for the prosecution was called, and the name shook the courtroom. Leon. Cody and Mary's son. The gallery gasped. Cody's face showed real shock. Leon hadn't been seen anywhere near the trial until today. And yet here they were, taking confident steps towards the stand, their value outweighing any exhibit or financial document. Keen's tone softened. "Why did you come forward today?" Leon's answer was soft, but firm. "Because I want people to understand what my father is really like." The words lingered in the air. "I've seen him lie for years, not only about money, about everything. He made us think we were one family, equals, but we weren't. We were tools. Tools for his reputation, his ego, his control." The room was quiet. No paper was shuffled. No cough disturbed the silence. "He doesn't love family," Leon insisted, his voice growing louder. "He loves loyalty. And if you're not loyal, you're disposable." Cody exploded, his expression contorted with rage. "That's not true," he bellowed. But the judge shut him down in an instant. "Mr. Brown, one more interruption, and I will empty this courtroom." Leon didn't even blink. "He manipulated us with money. He manipulated us with love. And when those didn't work, he manipulated us with fear." The testimony was over, but the shadow of those words hung in the air like a specter through the courtroom. It wasn't just testimony. It was a judgment. What followed was no longer a trial of pilfered dollars. It was an indictment of a lifestyle predicated on mastery. When recess was sounded, Christine passed Cody in silence. Robin didn't follow him out today. She sat where she was, looking at the vacant witness stand, as if reliving her own life in fast forward. Outside, the audience was noisier than ever. Justice for the Browns. They cried as Cody was led, expressionless, into a waiting car. That evening, by himself in his hotel room, Cody stood in front of the mirror. Glaring back was not the strong patriarch he had years ago convinced himself he was, not the unbreakable leader he had marketed to the world. No, what glared back was a man drained, fraying. Tomorrow hung over the town like a thundercloud. The prosecution threatened to reveal their most incriminating evidence to date, evidence so sensational, it would not only take away Cody's freedom, but rewrite everything the world had ever believed about the Brown family. The fourth day of the trial dawned under a strange silence. The raucous mobs outside had disappeared. No chants, no flashes from cameras, just oppressive quiet, as if the world itself was waiting to breathe. Inside courtroom 14, the atmosphere was hushed, almost cathedral-like, before a sermon. Christine arrived early, holding a folder laden with notes and faded photographs. She was tired, not merely in body, but in spirit. With every testimony, every revelation, she had been compelled to scratch away scars that she believed had long since healed. But beneath the weariness lay a determined quietness. She wasn't just going through this for herself anymore. She was standing for her children, for the other wives, for every lie she had ever swallowed. Cody arrived minutes later. His hair, usually slicked back, was disheveled. His eyes were red and sunken. Sleep had escaped him, and no matter how many times he tried to push Leon's words from his mind, they echoed relentlessly. He doesn't care about family. He cares about loyalty. And if you're not faithful, you're expendable. He wished it wasn't so, but the chill, unyielding glares of the jury informed him otherwise. Cody Brown's empire was crumbling, and for the first time in his life, he couldn't stop it. "All rise." The bailiff's voice echoed across the room as Judge Marks strode in, her arrival as authoritative as ever. She took her seat, keen eyes sweeping across the courtroom. "Court is now in session. Prosecution, you may proceed." Daniel Keene stood, his face grimmer than it had been all week. Your Honor, the prosecution today will offer a chain of documents and communications, which we believe demonstrate not just financial misconduct, but outright fraud, willful deceit, and an ongoing pattern of coercion far more egregious than anything this court has heard so far. The lights went down, and the projector began to hum. Everyone's eyes turned to the glowing screen. The first photo, a pile of bank statements. These, Keene said firmly, gesturing toward the screen, are payments made from the Brown family trust account to a private offshore account. The account was opened in the name Arden Group Holdings, a shell company that exists only on paper. That company was created, owned, and controlled by the defendant, Mr. Cody Brown. Cody leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched, his fingers wrapped around the edge of the table. These transfers, Keene went on, add up to over $2.1 million in 8 years. That's $700,000 more than was previously identified. And what did this money go for? To companies that benefited Mr. Brown directly. Companies none of his wives, children, or relatives knew anything about. Gasps spread through the room. Christine's fingers shook in her lap. She had been sure there were secret accounts. But this was worse than she could have thought. And if you thought secret money was the worst of it, Keene said solemnly, what's coming next will make that almost seem minor. The screen shifted. A chain of emails popped up. The sender, Cody Brown. The intended recipients, 2 financial managers and his own attorney. The subject line, Family Trust Reorganization. Asset Transfer Strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, Keene spoke to the jury. These emails outline a plan to break up the family trust and move all major assets, properties, business accounts, and even intellectual property rights into vehicles completely controlled by Mr. Brown. If this had passed, all wives, all children, would have been deprived of any legal right to family property. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Christine's eyes welled up with tears. She recalled the year clearly. Cody had explained to them that the family was reorganizing for tax reasons. He'd put papers before them, promising it was just routine. They'd signed, trusting him. And now the reality flashed from the screen. He'd been scheming to exclude them altogether. Even Michael Raines, Cody's defense lawyer, stumbled. He stood up. Objection, Your Honor, this is prejudicial, speculative. Judge Marks didn't blink. Overruled. The evidence speaks for itself. Keene hesitated, allowing the silence to linger before continuing. This plan never panned out. And why not? Because Christine Brown wouldn't sign one last piece of paper. One page, one moment of doubt. A gut feeling she decided to act upon. Preserved her and her family's rights to everything. Christine's mouth opened in shock. She had no idea how close she'd been to losing it all. But the prosecution wasn't done. Keene faced the judge again. Your Honor, the next witness won't be talking about money. They will be talking about manipulation, intimidation, and fear. The prosecution calls. Mary Brown. The room came to a standstill. For years Mary had been the quiet one. The wife who never spoke, who stayed on the periphery as the tempest raged. But now she slowly stood from her chair, her heels clicking softly across the courtroom floor as she made her way to the stand. She sat, swore, and steadied herself. Mrs. Brown. Keene started softly. Would you tell me about your relationship with Mr. Brown at the time these financial decisions were being made? Mary's eyes flashed over to Cody for a moment, before returning to the prosecutor. Her voice was firm but flat. Strained, she said flatly. If I questioned him about money, he'd get upset. If I asked him about anything significant, he'd say I was being ungrateful. Eventually he quit talking about actual decisions with me in general. Did he ever attempt to coerce you into signing documents you didn't read? Mary's hands shook on the stand. Yes, she whispered. Several times he would place papers in front of me and say things such as, it's just a formality, or if you really love this family you'll sign. It was always about loyalty, always about demonstrating I was on his side. Did you ever feel pressured? Keene asked softly. Yes, she breathed. I was scared of being replaced in the family. The courtroom held its breath. The image that was developing wasn't one of money. It was one of control, coercion, and breach of trust at the most fundamental level. Mrs. Brown. Keene persisted. Did you ever sign any of those documents? Mary nodded, guilt flashing over her face. Some of them. And I regret it every single day. But what followed left the room speechless. Mrs. Brown. Keene went on cautiously. Was Mr. Brown ever directly threatening to you? Mary's grip on the stand wavered, her fingers tightening on the edge of it. At last, she gained the courage. Yes, one time when I told him I didn't feel safe signing something, he said if I didn't trust him then I didn't need to be part of the family anymore. He said he'd make sure I left with nothing. A gasp ripped through the courtroom, the loudest so far. Even Judge Mark's stern face cracked with shock. Not true, Cody yelled, jumping up angrily. Judge Marks banged her gavel. Mr. Brown. Another outburst and you will be taken from this courtroom. Mary's eyes welled up with tears. I believed him. I really thought he could destroy me. That's why I stayed quiet for so long. Jurors nodded their heads in shock. Some scowled, others merely glared at Cody with hard, unblinking eyes. At the defense table, Cody's fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. But the most shocking revelation of the day was yet to come. Your Honor, Keene declared calmly, the prosecution makes a motion to introduce Exhibit J, a taped telephone call between Mr. Brown and one of his subordinates, obtained by court-approved subpoena. The courtroom air thickened with tension as the recording took up. Cody's voice dominated the room, deep and unmistakably steady. They're beginning to ask questions, he explained. But don't you worry, they'll sign anything I set before them. They always do. And if they don't, well, there are ways of making them wish that they had. A room-wide shiver passed through. And the finances? A second voice asked on the recording. They'll never find it, Cody replied. It's buried too deep. Even if they drag me into court, they'll never have the evidence. Silence, then an eruption. Reporters scrambled for their phones, racing to blast the story to the outside world. Jurors exchanged knowing glances, the kind that said, "We've already reached our verdict." Raines sprang to his feet. Objection, Your Honor, this is extremely prejudicial. Overruled, Judge Marks interrupted, her voice like iron. The evidence is admissible. And it is devastating. Cody slumped back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. This was not merely a setback. It was his ruin recorded in his own voice. As court adjourned, Christine passed by him in silence. And then, for a split second, she halted, moved in close, and whispered so he alone could hear. You said the truth would never come out. Looks like you were wrong. Cody did not look up. He could not. And yet this trial was only just beginning. Because the days that followed wouldn't only confirm Cody's guilt. They would unveil a secret so profound, even Christine had no idea it existed. A betrayal so devastating that it would destroy the Brown family forever. And when the truth finally erupted, it wouldn't only destroy Cody Brown's empire. It would redefine the sister wives narrative forever. The fifth day of the trial bore a weight unlike anything preceding it. It wasn't the popping cameras, the round-the-clock headlines, or even the building public outrage on the streets that made it different. It was the quiet. Not an easy hush, but the tense, thick quiet that descends when everybody knows that something cannot be undone is going to occur. Courtroom 14B was full an hour before the doors had even opened. Every seat was filled. The hallways rang with reporters shoving for room. Out front, protesters waved signs that said justice for the wives and accountability for Cody. Christine was there first. She was wearing blue, her face set in a firm but weary mask. She was not the same woman who had trembled into court on day one. The hurt was still there, in the tremble of her fingers, in the constriction in her chest, but it was different. Now it was something harder, something more. Determination. She was no longer a witness. She was a fighter, bearing years of shattered promises, pilfered cash, and smothering manipulation on her shoulders. Cody showed up a few minutes later. The difference between them was dramatic. He appeared emaciated, eyes hollow, slumped shoulders. His former arrogant strut vanished. The TV empire builder stood before them now, but a shadow of a man. His lawyer spoke urgently in his ear. But Cody didn't even blink. The tape from yesterday, his own voice, his words cold and calculating how he could make them wish they hadn't, were the final blow to any hope of redemption. But he held fast to one final lifeline, the possibility of spinning the story when his time to speak arrived. All rise, the bailiff instructed. Judge Marks arrived, her eyes hard, uncompromising. This court will now continue the case of Brown versus Brown. The prosecutor, Mr. Keene, stood up slowly, his presence serene but weighted with intent. Your Honor, he started, his tone calculated. Today, the evidence we present isn't merely about money. It is about the human cost, the true cost of Mr. Brown's activities. The first witness to take the stand was Janelle Brown. She strode up, head held high, her hands barely quivering. She had testified in court before, but today was different. Today, she wasn't here to explain spreadsheets or account balances. Today, she was here to speak of betrayal and survival. Mrs. Brown, Keene said softly, can you describe how Mr. Brown's financial choices affected you? Janelle took a breath, her own voice trembling but audible. It wasn't ever about money. It was about trust, safety. There were nights I didn't know if we had enough to pay the rent. Moments when the account was low, and we had to pay for groceries or medicine. And all the time, I had no idea he had thousands of dollars in hidden accounts. Did you ever talk to him about it? Keene asked. Oh, I did, Janelle replied, shaking her head firmly. But it was always the same response. He'd shut me down, tell me I didn't get it, that I was being dramatic. He'd tell me to remain focused on my role in the family rather than sticking my nose into things that weren't my business. And how did that make you feel? Janelle's voice wavered, but she persisted. It made me feel powerless, invisible, like I wasn't a partner at all, just a piece of his system. The room hung silent, the power of her words weighing on it like an impending storm cloud. This wasn't greed anymore. It was emotional abuse, control, silencing people until they no longer dared to speak. But the prosecution wasn't done. The next witness would cut still deeper. Your Honor, Keene stated. The state calls Madison Brown. The gallery buzzed in surprise. Madison, Janelle and Cody's daughter, walked purposefully to the stand. She was unruffled, but her calm was veneer thin. Her eyes revealed the ache she bore. After being sworn in, she sat straight, refusing to crumble. Miss Brown, Keene started gently. Can you describe to the court what it was like to live in your household when you were a child? Madison paused, finding courage. It was chaotic, she replied at last. Dad used to say that we were a team, but it never felt like that. There were favorites. Robin's children always got more. New clothes, vacations, whatever they wanted. And we were told there wasn't enough. No braces, no field trips, nothing special. Her voice broke a little, but she continued. And then, we'd see photographs online. Robin's children at Disneyland, smiling, having everything that we were led to believe was not possible. There was a shudder of discomfort that ran through the gallery. Some gasped, others shook their heads. For the jurors, the facts were no longer mere numbers. They were living testimony from a child who grew up in the shadow of favoritism and deceit. And the prosecution wasn't finished. Cody sat bolt upright, staring ahead without looking at Madison. Did you ever talk to your dad about this? Keene asked. Once, Madison answered, voice low but firm. He said I was selfish, that I didn't have any idea how much he worked. And I believed him. I felt bad for even asking. But now, she swallowed hard. Now I realize it was all a lie. He had the money. He just didn't care. Christine closed her eyes, swallowing hard. She had carried the pain, had watched it reflected in her children's eyes. But to hear it said out loud in open court was different. It was more. It was sharper. The wounds weren't hers alone. They were passed down. If the evidence to date had portrayed Cody as selfish and manipulative, the next testimony would reveal something more sinister, something criminal. Keene returned to the evidence table. Your Honor, the prosecution introduces Exhibit K, a series of tax returns filed by Mr. Brown over the last decade. The documents flickered onto the screen. These filings, Keene explained, reflect income reported from the family's ventures. But when compared to deposits in Mr. Brown's personal accounts, there's a discrepancy, nearly $800,000 unreported. A stunned silence gripped the courtroom. Tax evasion, no longer mere betrayal, now federal crime country. Mr. Brown, Keene told him, his eyes slicing through the room. Can you explain where that $800,000 disappeared to? Raines sprang to his feet. Objection! The defendant is not sworn. Withdrawn, Keene replied smoothly. But the harm was done. The figure had been seated in the jury's minds. This wasn't sloppy accounting. This was intent. This was fraud with bite. And still, the most stunning testimony of the day was not from the prosecution's files. It belonged to someone no one was expecting to see back on the stand. The prosecution calls Robin Brown. The courtroom gasped as a single collective breath carried across it. Robin hesitated, glancing nervously in Cody's direction. He didn't budge, didn't even blink. At last she got up and walked to the witness box. Her hands trembled as she clasped the wooden railing. Mrs. Brown, Keene cooed softly. You've already given your testimony. Why have you come back now? Her lips trembled. Because, I can't do it anymore. I can't lie for him. The room came to a standstill. Explain yourself. Tears flowed down Robin's face. I knew about the accounts, all of them, the offshore transfers, the shell companies. I even helped him create some of them. He said it was for the family, for protection. I believed him. And was that the truth? Robin nodded her head, cracking her voice. No, it was for him, always for him. Gasps filled the room. Did he ever ask you to lie to the other wives? Yes, Robin whispered. All the time. He said to tell them we were broke, to tell them the money was spent, to tell them they were spending too much. He trained me, and I did, repeatedly. The gallery turned glacial. Christine's stare scorched Robin, anger and compassion conflicting. The woman who had been Cody's staunchest supporter now shredding his final barrier of protection, under oath. And why? Keene asked quietly. Are you finally telling the truth? Robin dabbed at her face, her voice shaking but firm. Because I'm finished being his puppet. Because they need to hear the truth. Cody's face paled. His jaw locked so hard a vein throbbed furiously in his temple. He resembled a man standing by as his fortress of self-deception fell stone by stone. But the knockout punch would not be delivered by Robin. It would come from Cody himself. As Judge Marks prepared to adjourn, she turned to the defense. Mr. Raines, will your client be testifying? Raines hesitated, then gave a cautious nod. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Brown will take the stand tomorrow. Before he could finish, Cody slammed his palm against the defense table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. No, his voice thundered, raw and cracking. I'm speaking now. Mr. Brown, Raines hissed, horrified. Not now. But Cody was already on his feet, storming toward the witness stand. No more lies. No more lawyers. I'm done. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters leapt to their feet. The gallery buzzed with shock. Judge Marks pounded her gavel furiously. Order! Order in the court. But it was too late. Cody threw up his hand, took the oath, and turned to the room, his eyes crazed, his voice wavering on the brink of confession and fury. And in that second everybody knew, the scandal was going to blow into full-blown catastrophe. Do you want the truth? Cody screamed, his voice breaking. Fine, here it is. I did it. All of it. I transferred the money. I opened the accounts. I lied. His chest puffed out as he pointed a shaking finger towards the shocked gallery. I did what I had to do to save myself. Because none of you ever cared about me. Not once. The courtroom gasped as one. Here you're sitting talking about betrayal. Cody's face contorted in anger. What about me? I built this family myself. I gave you all everything. And the minute things got tough, you turned on me. Christine, you walked away. Janelle, you floated away. Mary, you closed down. And Robin, his voice cracked, pain flashing in his eyes. Even you. After all of it, even you betrayed me. His voice cracked now, half anger, half desperation. So yeah, I stole the money, because I knew one day y'all would leave. I knew I'd be standing here by myself, and I wasn't going to be left with nothing. Mr. Brown, that's enough. Judge Marks slammed her gavel down, but Cody just got louder. Do you want to make me the bad guy? Okay, I'm the bad guy, but don't you sit there acting innocent. The bailiff rushed forward as the courtroom erupted into confusion. Christine sat paralyzed, appalled. Robin wept hysterically. The jurors all looked on in shock and revulsion. In that moment, Cody had destroyed every defense, his own admission driving the final nail into his own case. And yet, though as bleak as that diatribe had been, it wasn't over. Hidden beneath Cody's wrath remained a secret, one nobody had uttered yet, a truth in waiting to explode. As Cody was led away under close guard, Christine stood in the aisle, unmoving. For years she had pleaded with him to confess what he had done. Now that he finally did, there was no solace, only aching, empty sadness for the man she once loved, and for the family he had destroyed with his own two fists. By evening, headlines blazed across every outlet. Cody Brown implodes in court. Sister Wives Patriarch admits to fraud. Shock admission could spur federal charges. The world was shocked. But one question loomed over every broadcast, every op-ed, every conversation. If this was Cody's breaking point, what was still hidden beneath the surface? The sixth day of trial broke stormy, the air heavy with anticipation. Cody's breakdown had already turned the case from acrimonious family squabble to national scandal. His confession, "I did it, I stole the money," was on all the news tickers, all the social feeds, and the prosecution kept insisting the most incriminating hints hadn't even been unveiled. Outside the courthouse, the hubbub was unprecedented. News vans occupied the sidewalks. Protesters hoisted signs calling for justice. Commentators were speculating about jail time. Christine navigated the mayhem, with her head held high. She'd slept little. Cody's words echoed in her mind. "I knew you'd all leave, and I was not going to be left with nothing." For the first time, he'd spoken the truth aloud. But it gave her no pleasure, not revenge, not triumph, just closure for herself, for her children, for a family that was no more. Inside, the courtroom was filled to capacity. Spectators with no relation to the Browns had simply come to see history made. The bailiff struggled for order. Then Judge Marks came in, and the conversation died into an electric silence. "We continue the case of Brown versus Brown," she announced. "Mr. Keene, you can proceed." Daniel Keene climbed the stairs deliberately, his visage serene but firm. "Your Honor," he started, his voice ringing clearly over the quiet courtroom. "Yesterday the defendant admitted to fraud and deception. Today the prosecution will introduce new evidence. Evidence which not only substantiates his confession, but proves it beyond doubt." The scene was set. The world watched its breath. The evidence that morning cut deeper than anyone anticipated. "Ladies and gentlemen," Prosecutor Keene declared, his tone unflappable, "what we have discovered is not one error or lapse of judgment. It is an orchestrated operation." In the background, the screen came alive with spreadsheets, bank statements, and email exchanges. Over the last 6 months, our investigators followed a convoluted web of money. These accounts run not only throughout Arizona and Utah, but to 4 other states and 2 overseas nations. All these accounts are connected to shell corporations, set up by Mr. Brown, or his network. The aggregate money transferred in this network. Keene waited for dramatic effect. More than $3.7 million. The courtroom gasped. Christine's eyes went wide. Even Robin, who had thought she'd seen everything, looked shocked. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't greed. It was calculated financial engineering on a scale no one had ever dreamed of. And Keene wasn't finished. He advanced to the next slide. We further learned that some of these funds were diverted into accounts in the names of Mr. Brown's adult children, unbeknownst to, and without the consent of, his adult children. Those accounts were used to conceal the source of the money. The gallery burst into appalled whispers. Cody writhed in his chair as his lawyer leaned forward, whispering with rage in his ear. "More than unethical," Keene continued. "This is willful tax evasion and money laundering. Federal offenses." Christine's breath hitched. The children. He had dragged their names, his own blood, into the darkness of his plot. That was a line she hadn't even known was there. This was no longer betrayal. This was exploitation. The first witness called by the prosecution, a forensic accountant, Dr. Robert Klein, a mild-mannered, immovable, financial crimes expert. What Mr. Brown did, Clean explained, was typical layering. He layered transaction on top of transaction, each one aimed at concealing the trail. It's a tactic commonly used in organized crime, but not in a family context. Was it intentional? Keen asked. Without a doubt, Clean answered. The complexity here does not allow for mistake. This was deliberate. But if the statistics stunned the courtroom, the following witness broke its heart. Your Honor, Keen declared. The prosecution calls. McKelty Brown. A shocked whisper ran through the room. McKelty, who had not so far spoken, walked slowly to the stand. She swore, her eyes straying for a fraction of a second to her father before dropping to the floor. McKelty, Keen said softly, describe your relationship with your father as a child. Her voice was quiet, shaking. It was complicated. I loved him. I craved his approval. But it always seemed conditional. If I did what he wanted, he was proud of me. If I questioned him, I was being disloyal. Did you know there were accounts in your name? Tears filled her eyes. No. I didn't discover it until the IRS called me. They informed me that I had income that hadn't been reported. I figured it was some error. Until they pulled out the paperwork. The courtroom fell silent. Cody fixed his gaze on the defense table, his eyes refusing to meet hers. And how did that make you feel? Keen asked. Her voice broke. Like I was just a tool. Like he didn't consider me a daughter. Only a cover. I loved him, and he endangered my life without even informing me. Christine clamped her hand over her mouth, stifling sobs. The man she loved had not only deceived her, he had deceived their children in the most callous manner possible. And then the witness who dismantled any remaining sympathy Cody might have had. The prosecution calls Daniel Foster. Foster, a now ex-financial consultant, strode to the stand. His was a blunt, damning testimony. Mr. Brown retained me to set up offshore accounts, he stated. He explained specifically it was to protect his assets from, in his words, greedy ex-wives. He mentioned nothing about his family finding out. Did he ever imply his kids knew about these accounts? Keen asked. Foster shook his head unequivocally. Never. In fact, he said secrecy was key. The gallery was abuzz with indignation. Even the jurors' faces were now stone-faced. Cody Brown's reputation wasn't just sullied, it was destroyed. The seventh day broke under a bruised sky, clouds low drooping as if the heavens themselves witnessed. The courthouse no longer buzzed with scandal's frenzy. It pulsed instead with a denser silence. This wasn't show anymore. It was judgment. Christine went in first, dressed in black. Her expression was serene, bordering on regal, but her eyes were weighted with years. Years of manipulation, broken promise, children having to mature in the shadow of a broken home. She wasn't here for retribution. That flame had gone out ages ago. She was here for something harder, colder, accountability. Then Cody Brown arrived. But he was no longer the patriarch who strode in with a dozen cameras at his heels. The man who shuffled now was empty. His suit hung off his skeletal frame. His eyes were dull. His hands shook as federal marshals led him into position. He gazed at no one. Not Christine. Not his wives. Not his children. All rise. The bailiff called. Judge Marks entered, her face as impassive as stone. His court is now in session, she stated. Prior to closing arguments, the prosecution has signaled that it has a last witness. Mr. Keen, proceed. Keen stood slowly, fiddling with his glasses. His voice was low, measured, bordering on tender. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Savannah Brown. A ripple ran through the courtroom. Christine's breath caught. Savannah, her baby had avoided it until now, hidden away as much as possible. But here she was, moving forward with shoulders squared and eyes glassy, weighing the burden no teenager should ever have to endure. She swore, voice firm though her trembling hands. Keen moved forward carefully. Savannah, thank you for coming in today. Can you tell us in your own words how your father's actions have impacted on you? She swallowed, her voice tiny but unshakable. I thought my dad was a hero, she started. I trusted him. I believed everything he said. And then, all of this began. He didn't call anymore. He didn't come around anymore. I asked him for money once for a school field trip. He told me he didn't have any. But now I know he did. He just didn't want to spend it on me. The quiet was oppressive. Cody blinked hard, as though resisting something he hadn't let himself feel. Did you feel supported by your father? Keen asked. Savannah shook her head. No, I felt abandoned. Like I wasn't important. And it wasn't even about money. It was birthdays, holidays, graduation. He wasn't there, but he was always there for Robin's kids. Always. Her voice broke. Christine's tears finally overflowed, running down her cheeks as she saw her daughter bear the truth she had carried for so many years. Why did you decide to testify today? Keen inquired gently. Savannah took a shaky breath. Because I want him to know something. He didn't just steal money. He stole time, he stole memories, he stole the opportunity for me to have a father. The words landed like rocks into quiet pond water, their ripples resonating in each heart that was in the room. For the very first time during the entire trial, Cody's mask broke. His chest rose and fell with his labored breathing. His lips shook. But it was too late. The truth had been uttered by the one voice he could not deny. Ladies and gentlemen, Rain started, his tone firm but with a hint of fatigue. No one is contesting that mistakes were made. Mr. Brown himself has acknowledged them. But I want you to keep in mind something behind every headline. Behind every accusation, there stands a man, a father, a husband, a human being who, despite his shortcomings, once made a home, raised kids, and attempted, however imperfectly, to give. He walked deliberately in front of the jury. Yes, the accounts appear damning. Yes, the testimony was wrenching. But are we actually saying this man, this imperfect, struggling man, was a criminal genius planning some grand heist? Or was he perhaps someone overwhelmed by the burden of expectations, responsibilities, and the hopeless endeavor to be everything to everybody? Did he stash cash? He has testified that he did. But was it malice or fear? Rain turned, his eyes scanning the jurors, mollifying his voice as if addressing them individually. Fear of losing the family he'd created. Fear of losing the respect he used to command. Fear of having nothing left after he'd spent his entire life caring about everyone else. You heard his confession, yes, but listen again to the words behind it. This was not the calculating coldness of a predator. It was the pain of a man who felt betrayed by those he cared most for. Was he wrong? Yes. Was he irresponsible? Absolutely. But criminal intent, the type that should obliterate a man's existence behind prison bars, is a whole different thing. He paused, allowing the words to breathe. I beg you not to pardon him. I beg you to look at him, to look not at the pages of ledger books and tax returns, but at the father who faltered, the husband who fell short, the man who crumbled beneath the weight of his own creation. Punish the error if you can, but do not damn the man's soul as hopelessly lost. Justice is supposed to mend, not demolish. Rain took a step back, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. He understood the statistics. He understood the landslide of facts. But his ultimate appeal wasn't about facts anymore. It was about sowing one tiny seed of doubt, or compassion, into the hearts of 12 strangers. The courtroom was silent, each ear willing to take in the final words of the defense. And then all heads turned back to Judge Marks, whose expression revealed nothing. Members of the jury, she declared sternly, you will now withdraw to consider. The gavel crashed, sounding like a clap of thunder through the quiet room. The bailiff ordered order, and Judge Marks appeared, her black robe fluttering behind her like a shadow. All stood, all sat, and silence fell. Mr. Brown, the judge started, her tone stern. You are now convicted on several charges of financial fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and coercion. The jury has reached a verdict. It is my duty now to sentence you according to those crimes. Before I do this, you have a right to make a statement. Everybody watched Cody. For an instant he did not move. White-faced, hands cuffed but unfaltering. Then with slow deliberation, he stood up. Newsmen leaned forward. Christine gasped. Even Robin could not stop shaking. Your Honor, Cody whispered. his voice full of an unnatural calm. "I respect the verdict of the jury. I will not appeal it. I will not plead for mercy. But before I'm sentenced, there is something I need to tell you. Something that alters everything you have heard about me." The room hummed with murmurs. Judge Marks held up a hand. "Go on, but be concise." Cody took a breath, his gaze sweeping over the wives and fixing on Christine. "The truth," he added, his voice sharpening, "is that I wasn't acting in isolation. The accounts, the transfers, the offshore assets, they were never solely mine. I was hiding for someone else, someone who remains at large." Gasps sliced through the room, like blades. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. The wives stood stock still, frozen into statues. Christine's face went cold. "Name them," Judge Marks commanded. Cody hesitated. For the first time since his arrest, a smile crossed his lips. "I think you already know." The room exploded. Chaos, yelling, conjecture, but the news hung in the air like smoke that no one was able to clear. Christine's heart pounded. She had no idea what frightened her more, that he was lying in one last act of revenge, or that he was finally being honest. And at that moment, with sentencing imminent, there was one thing that could no longer be disputed. The trial of Cody Brown was not where the story stopped. It was only the start of something sinister. The words struck the courtroom like a clap of thunder. Even Judge Marks hesitated, her brow shooting up in astonishment. "Mr. Keene," she said hesitantly, "this is extremely irregular. Sentencing is not the arena for introducing fresh evidence." Keene bowed his head. "I see, Your Honor, but what we have is not speculation. It is a confirmed message discovered only during the past 48 hours. It addresses directly the defendant's mindset and his purposes outside of this court." A murmur of gasps ran through the gallery. Christine gripped the edge of the bench, so hard her knuckles were white. Judge Marks waved his hand. "Go on." Keene took a thin folder from his desk and passed it to the bailiff, who gave it to the judge. "What you have before you, Your Honor, are duplicates of encrypted emails that were pulled from an arrested laptop that is owned by Mr. Brown. They were not discoverable during trial. In these, the defendant arranges to have money sent offshore following his arrest. More chillingly, he outlines an escape plan from federal detention, with the help of an unseen partner in crime." The room exploded. Reporters rushed to transcribe every syllable. Mary clapped her hand over her mouth. Robin closed her eyes. Janelle glanced down at her hands, as though preparing for another blow. Judge Marks read through the papers hastily, her face growing increasingly dark by the second. And then she fixed Cody a glare. "Mr. Brown, do you deny the validity of these communications?" Cody's mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. "They're mine," he replied. His tone was bland, almost challenging. "I didn't want to sit around in a cell and waste away. I did what I always do. I made a plan." The courtroom was silent once more, but it was the heavy silence of comprehension this time. This man, the father, the husband, the patriarch, was still plotting. Even in handcuffs, even with decades in prison staring him in the face, he was still making his escape plans. Christine's chest constricted. She had thought the guilty verdict was the end of it. Now she knew better. Judge Marks breathed, the burden of the discovery evident in her gaze. "Very well," she stated, her voice as hard as steel. "The court has heard quite enough. Now is the time to pass sentence." The papers had only just emerged from a federal investigation, new evidence no one anticipated. Judge Marks lifted an eyebrow, her voice firm but inquisitive. "Proceed." Prosecutor Keene did not wait. He displayed a folder, its pages shown on the courtroom screen. "Your Honor, these bank records, secured from a foreign bank just days ago, show an account held by Mr. Brown alone. It contains more than $1.20 million, money transferred after this trial started. A blatant attempt to conceal assets, in obvious disregard of this court's orders." The courtroom exploded. Christine inhaled sharply. Janelle shook her head in outrage. Robin hid behind her hands. Judge Marks snapped her attention to Cody. "Mr. Brown, did you try to make a transfer under the watchful eye of this court?" Cody's mouth opened, but he made no noise. His silence spoke louder than words could have. "Then let the record reflect," said Judge Marks in a level tone. that this constitutes a willful disregard of court orders, a defiant act of contempt. Her voice contained no indignation, only inevitability. It will carry a lot of weight in sentencing. Whatever glimmer of hope Cody may have held on to gone. His final desperate bid for leverage had locked his doom. The room seemed to still. Judge Marks adjusted her glasses and looked directly at him. Mr. Brown, rise. He stood trembling, his hands shaking against the table for balance. Now this court, Judge Marks started, has examined overwhelming evidence of your conduct, extended financial deception, coercive control, tax evasion, money laundering. You misled and manipulated the very people nearest to you, your wives, your children, out of self-interest. You expressed little or no remorse, and even after being convicted, you attempted to conceal additional funds. She paused, and the silence was so dense you could hear the tick of the courtroom clock. For these offenses, she said, this court imposes upon you 27 years in state and federal prison, with no possibility of parole, for the first 20. The words struck like rock. Christine's tears ran down her face, not tears of happiness, but relief. Finally it was done. Cody's knees slightly buckled. 27 years. He'd be almost 80, if ever he walked out of it as free man. In the courtroom, whispers dissolved into waves. Cameras popped, but Cody heard nothing, only the reverberation of his own destruction. And in addition, Judge Marks went on, you are to pay restitution of $3.7 million to the victims of your offenses. Default will bring added sanctions. Cody's voice trembled, hardly above a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. The gavel was poised to fall, when a sudden voice pierced the strain. Your Honor, Christine whispered. The judge nodded slightly. Mrs. Brown. Christine stood, her legs shaking, but her voice firm. She turned to Cody. Years, she started. I believed that this day would make me happy. I believed seeing you punished would repair something inside of me. But it doesn't. Because no punishment, no amount of years, can erase what you did. She took a deep, trembling breath. You didn't steal money. You stole time. You stole trust. You stole parts of me that I will never have back. And yet, she hesitated. The courtroom waiting with its breath bated. I forgive you. Not for your own benefit, but mine. Because I will no longer bear your guilt on my shoulders. A gasp from the courtroom. Cody's mouth quivered. A tear fell for the first time in weeks down his face. He tried to speak, but his mouth moved silently. Christine sat back down quietly. Her shoulders, while tired, were lighter than they had been in years. It wasn't victory that she bore. It wasn't revenge. It was peace. The bailiff put a hand on Cody's arm. It's time. Cody spun one final time, his gaze landing on Christine, and then on his children. And out of sight he was. Through the doors, down the hallway, and into a future without power, without control. Outside, the sky at last opened, rain deluging down in sheets, as if heaven itself desired to cleanse the slate. Christine waded into it, allowing the storm to drench her to the bone. For the first time in years, the rain tasted like liberty. Reporters surrounded her with queries. Do you think justice was served? What lies ahead for you? Will you ever again speak with Cody? She paused, caught her breath, and replied with inner strength. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about truth. And today, the truth finally won. The crowd erupted in cheers as she stepped down from the courthouse steps into a new life. A life no longer bound to Cody Brown, but constructed on healing, hope, and freedom. And what about Cody? The proud patriarch reduced now to just another guy, in an orange jumpsuit with nothing left but the burden of his own decisions. His empire ashes, his authority lost, his prison started long before the steel doors clanged shut behind him. And now, I leave you with a question. If you were Christine, would you forgive Cody? Or are some betrayals too deep to ever release? Let me know in the comments.